I mean, to do things together in Europe. That's why we are organized in European standardization bodies.
And just briefly to pick up, although we'll focus on it more in the second session, then the relationship between the European and the international, and the concern that as we move more and more to international standards in a globalized context, they could undermine our European ones?
I am not concerned either, because I mean, there's no continent more engaged in international standardization than Europe. We have agreements like the Frankfurt and the Vienna Agreement to make sure that there's no parallel work on ISO, IEC, and in Senelec. So we do it together, and it's really about the engagement of the European stakeholders through the national standardization bodies to work actively in international standardization, to bring European ideas and European standards up to the international level, which is required from an industrial point of view. They need international standards. Yeah. That's why we need to be active and pushy.
Joachim.
Yeah, I also fully agree that talking about international standards means largely a strong European impulse. So I definitely haven't created in my mind this opposition between labor and social, environmentally protective European standards against Wild West international standards. I don't think that that's the picture at all. And I don't think there's a need to be too worried about that. And I think that we also have to reason that, from a trade point of view, I know that it's not your point of view, but I mean from a trade point of view, if we start developing too much standards of our own, we cannot complain that then other places of the world have standards of their own. Yeah. So okay. There's a risk there.
We'll come back on this in our second panel. Can I come back to the awareness point? Because it's something many of you raised, and Juliana and you raised it in the national context. You talked about national stakeholders. Veronique, you talked about it in relation to your members, to small and medium-sized company, and Peter also with workers. What are the priorities? What do we need to do if we are to get that message across? I'd like to focus on that first and then come back to the consortia question afterwards. But in terms of awareness raising, what have we done? What do we know about what works? What more can be done among your members, Juliana, among the people you represent?
Well, I'm sure that we have to tackle not only the private sector, but also the public sector. At least in Romania, we have to work more in this area to raise awareness in the public sector, because standards are very powerful tools to cost-effectively implement public policy objectives. And actually we aim that policymakers in Romania will more embrace standards. Lots of policymakers, lots of politicians like me have legal background, and they're more used to top-down approach to rules, impose rules, rather than bottom-up collaborative process approaches. And actually the system that we are part in, the European standardization system, is a very powerful one, because here stakeholders, practitioners, they agree to work together in a collaborative manner, coming up with solutions that are widely consulted and give tools in almost all the areas. One of the key priority also I see, it was mentioned by Commissioner Bieńkowska, is the education, of course. And education will provide us skillful people that will participate in future standardization work. And here, when I refer to skillful, I also have in mind innovative approaches. Innovative approaches, as in we need in the system to be imaginative, to think of new fields of activities that our principles of work, our processes of work could apply and could give relevant results and relevant tools for other activities.
Might talk about what can be done under the next Commission in that area to advance that. But Veronique, staying with this awareness question for a moment, and then Henri, I'd like a perspective from you on policymakers and that challenge of awareness. For SMEs, you talked about that awareness question. It has been very much part of the joint initiative, very much a focus on greater inclusiveness, involvement of more stakeholders, but still there are barriers. Is the key barrier awareness of the benefits of becoming involved, or is it something else? Is it resources? What's the problem?
Well, I think it's a combination. I think that putting more emphasis during the education on the importance of standards and how a company can benefit from standards, also in using standards to go cross-border, is an important element. And secondly, I think also when we disseminate information, I think everybody will agree that standards can be quite technical and complex. You already put it forward. Making sure that SMEs are aware of relevant standards for their company in a way that they can digest it in an easy way. And for those who haven't heard the story yet, the average company in Europe has 4 employees. That means that the entrepreneur is working during the day with those employees, and knowing more about standards will come in the evenings or the weekends. So we need to make sure that information on standards is in a digestible format. Thirdly, it also needs to be compatible with craft production methods, for instance. We need to make sure that their unique selling proposition from an SME, being that they have their specific way of working, isn't hampered or taken away by the standard. And then fourth, I think also when willing to participate in the standardization process, SMEs have specific barriers, limitations. They don't have time to travel around the world. So having the ability, and that's also what came up during the Small Business Standards Conference a few weeks ago, having the ability for remote participation, and with digital technologies all over the place, we have more possibilities than 10 or 20 years ago to have that participation. I think those are already very important elements.
Yeah. So something we'll come back to when we talk about how to enhance the process, that procedural side that Joachim talked about at the beginning. Henri, a brief word, if you would, in terms of policymakers, because the Commissioner made this point very strongly as well in terms of public authorities, the role of public procurement here, and very much echoed by Juliana. What do you think would make the difference in making the policymakers more aware of the importance of this issue? This is a room of people, pretty much they're here because they know it matters. How do we make more people know it matters?
Yeah. Well, reflecting on this, I think my sense is, at least for the countries I represent, that there is actually a fairly high level of awareness of the importance of standards, but that can be improved, should be improved, and it's obviously not the case across Europe. I think this awareness is probably linked with the fact that our economies are very internationalized, so our companies are very aware that the lack of standards can be a very painful obstacle for exports. My sense is that the awareness will raise, or probably already raises, as a result of things like this joint initiative. I mean, if you have all stakeholders involved from the outset, they will have ownership, and then ownership will bring knowledge and dissemination. Yeah. So my encouragement is to go on this way, to continue to do that. Public procurement you mentioned, and there's certainly a point where governments can have direct action in referring to standards when publishing a new public procurement market. Something that I think is very developed in our country that could be an example is the inclusion of the academia into the development of standards, whereby this is not confined to a circle numerous, but still of specialists and insiders, but kind of included and spread into society, and kind of part of curriculum and of the cooperation of academia with the industry. So these are 3 avenues where I think there is room for improvement.
Joachim, can we come back on this challenge that you identified from a substance point of view? I'll come back to the procedural afterwards, if I might. And you said your question was, what more can the standardization community do to contribute to the consortia that are being set up within the framework of the EU's industrial policy? What is your answer to that question?
Well, my answer is certainly that it's also a question. My invitation is that the standardization community takes up this challenge, in the sense that for the European Commission nowadays, the single market and the industrial policy go hand in hand together. We don't just want to have a single market for products from other countries to travel around Europe. We want Europe to be strong. And for Europe to be strong, I mean, we are quite keen in stepping up in developing sectors, heavily investing in sectors in a public-private partnership approach, key sectors which are important for the future as Europe as a viable, robust economic entity. And I definitely think that the standardization community, and I'm happy to engage in that dialogue with them, take up that challenge and see how they can contribute to that effort. I think that we've been talking too much.
But there was already in the joint initiative this focus on key areas. What do you think needs to be different in the future?
Well, because the key areas have been defined now.
Yeah.
They are being defined now.
Right.
And they're going to start now. All these processes are being set up now. You've got, by the end of this month, a group of representatives of industry that with the Commission will come up with the 2030 industrial policy priorities, and we're about to receive that report from industry. We have set up this strategic forum with the identification of these concrete value chains that we are going to actively support. And I think that it would be important, therefore I think that we've been focused only on standards as a deliverable of harmonized law, of directives, but we have to start thinking about standards as a key to enable Europe's economic industrial future.
Thank you. Veronique, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I think that I can support this also, the importance of standards in those value chains. For instance, what we see now with the development of data economy, AI, if we really want to make sure that SMEs can also take part in that growth and with data becoming more and more important, it will be crucial that we have standards that make sure that there is interoperability, that the whole chain has access to the data where necessary. For instance, in car manufacturing, if the data are only with the car manufacturer, repair shops will have a problem. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue where we need standards to really make sure that the whole value chain is on the way to development.
Christoph.
I couldn't agree more. If we want European standards to really support the European industry, and the average size of a European company is less than 10 employees, we cannot only focus on involving the small companies into the standardization process. It's even more important to make them aware what are the relevant standards or the relevant elements in the standard documents, which might be quite complex, that should be known by the SMEs that try to build up a business in a certain new technology area. So it's very important that we are not only focused on inclusiveness in the standard development process, which is very important, but make the standards easy to read, easy to understand, have some kind of orchestration to find out in an easy way what are the relevant pieces of the standards for an SME. I think that is something where we can build on.
And your reaction to what Joachim is saying, do you believe, as we move into this new phase, do you think we're going to need a different, talking substance now, we'll talk process in a minute, but a new type of standards? Is the challenge fundamentally the same for you as standardizers as it's always been, or has it changed? For example, with the integration of products and services, is it changing, and digitalization, is it changing things beyond recognition or not?
If we are creating standards in a traditional way, it ends up in a document having like 150 pages, trying to kind of completely cover the scope of one technology area. While in the future, we must have something that can be kind of sold or offered in a completely different way. That the SMEs are not forced to read these 150 pages of documents, that they can access the ingredients. So we decouple the standard development, which is document focused, to the kind of making information available. So, and that is very important, that we have a lower level of granularity of the technical requirements that are described in these documents, because they are not required as a whole when you try to use them from an SME's point of view. So having what we call machine-readable standards doesn't mean to make the document as such machine-readable. It's making understandable from a kind of automation point of view. What is an essential requirement which is relevant under which preconditions? Yeah. And that could be used in building up a system like this.
Juliana.
Yeah, building on what Christoph was saying, I see as a challenge for our system this language of the content, how it is presented, especially considering that we are going, or the intention is to tackle different other areas, especially services. I truly believe that there is a a considerable potential for service standardization, for service standards. And for that, we need probably a different language, especially for SMEs, because SMEs are involved in providing services. And standardization grew and developed as a system in the engineering context, but nowadays we would like to have involved in standardization law professionals, medical professionals, and other professions. Therefore, we need to pay attention and maybe to consider the language, the content of the language, the language of the content.
Peter, a reaction from you, and then Veronique, I know you want to come in, and Omri,
I wanted to react on your awareness raising and
Yeah.
awareness among trade unions and workers. That is the first thing is when we come with standards and we really intensified our work on standardization in the last 3-4 years, and when we put it on the agenda, then of course quite often the first reaction is, will standards replace law, or will labor law, protection law, will standards interfere with collective bargaining agreements and so on, and what was done among the social partners, will standards interfere in that, and negatively, of course. That is the first reaction. And to raise awareness that standards at the same time do a lot good things, protect workers, and we have many examples for that. That is, I think it's so important for us to make that known among our membership, and that is a reason why we do all these seminars, the national seminars, and getting our representatives in touch with the national standardization organizations. But there is a bit of difficulties, because some, they really charge money for it, and some offer it for free. So it would be good that we have a European rule for that all standardization organizations do it in the same way, because we have some small trade unions. For them it's a lot of money when they have to pay for each single 500 euros for each single standard. So it must be possible that we participate for free and make sure, and that would increase the acceptance, of course, and make sure that there is active participation. But of course, with all the experts, we have the problems quite often, the language problem. That is a reason why we train our experts even in the fantastic English language, so that they really can participate. There is a lot of work to do, but I think it's worthwhile to do, because when we really participate in this process, I think then the standardization or standards have the chance to be really accepted and being proactive supported.
Yeah. Veronique, I know you wanted to come in, and then Omri, I'd like to come back on this question of the role of academia, of education, of universities and so on, but Veronique, I think you wanted to react.
Briefly wanted to react also on the standardization of services. We are very cautious with that concept. As I mentioned, especially for SMEs, you need to take into account their specific way of working. In services, certainly, often their way of providing a service is their unique selling proposition, and when you start standardizing that, you take away the unique selling proposition of the small company. So we're very cautious on how we have to move forward with that one.
Just on the point about education and training and so on, and of course another area of priority for the joint initiative on standardization. Henri, you mentioned the role of academia in all of this. Why do you think it's so important?
My sense is there should be a connection between what universities do, what they teach, and the kind of research they're doing, and the real world of industry. And that can be mutually supportive. It should not. That's good for the education purposes, because the student you study, they are prepared to the real world, but they can also contribute then for the needs of the industry with the latest development of science. So I believe this field of activities should be kind of joint and linked for this purpose.
Thank you. Yeah, Christoph.
I think it's very important to understand that we have a significant lack of standardization topics in the curricula of our universities. I mean, that is essential, that we train young people. I mean, you shouldn't be able to get a bachelor or master degree without understanding the principle and the advantages of standardization. But unfortunately, that's the case. But in order to motivate the universities and the professors to put standardization on top of their agenda, I mean, they need to combine it with their innovation and research activity, which is an easy thing. If you talk about disruptive technology, and everybody learns that, they're trying to put a disruptive technology, let's talk about artificial intelligence, into the practical use. They will face a lot of resistance because people don't understand. The ecosystem is not defined, the rules are not clear, so you can show that something works fantastically in a lab. But to deploy it in industrial use and have it widely accepted is almost impossible. So the more disruptive the technology gets, the more important is it to talk about the requirements around the technology to make it applicable. And that is described through standards. Yeah. So they could actually, in parallel to the development of research pilots, think about what are the required standards in order to put it into action later on. And that's kind of a focus where we can get support from the European Commission, from the policymakers, to kind of make that a prerequisite. If you want to get funding for developing a new technology, you have at the same time think about how to deploy it and what the standards are required.
So don't leave this as an afterthought, embed it in the process.
Exactly.
Jakob, a thought from you, and then I'm coming out to the audience, and then we'll come to the procedural question.
My thought will be very quick. It's just that I think that we need to translate this into deliverables. And since that everybody agrees that the education in standardization and developing greater awareness in academia of standardization, but how intrusive, how much do we want to push for this and how? I think that we need to start thinking about the how. We all agree on the importance of the go, but I think we have to, we have to start saying, and this, and therefore we're going to do this, that, and
have we learned anything so far about how to do it effectively?
Possibly. I think that certainly there is increasing awareness of the importance of the subject, and there's a lot of talk about a lot of aging experts not being replaced and firms not investing enough on standardization, etc., whereas everybody keeps thinking this is very important. So there seems to be a gap, but I think that we need to start thinking about what are the concrete measures to fill in the gap.
I mean, I don't know. You seem quite a youthful panel to me. Juliana, in this country, is the standardization community, does it tend to be older? Do we have a pipeline of people coming through or not? Do you think this is a serious concern for the future?
Yes, it is. It is. I feel that across Europe, standardization education is quite fragmented, and Joachim was saying how to do that. Well, here is a proposal. Probably we should start somewhere. We could start. That's a proposal from a workshop that we hold in Bucharest with the academics on education about standardization, and one of the proposals was let's start to set up some winter school in collaboration with different universities across Europe about standardization, and let's start somewhere. Yeah.
Veronica, I think you want to make a quick point. Peter, you might want to react, and then I'm going out to the room.
Because I can recall when I was in college that the hype of quality management was always linked to ISO. I mean, we learned about standards linked to quality management, and that hype has passed. Meanwhile, I think that quality management has been high on the agenda 20 years ago, but it's been lowering in attention, and for us there was a clear link between standards and quality management. And maybe we should create a hype again on standards as such, try to find a way forward on that one.
Thank you. Henri, you wanted to come in, and then Peter, I'll give you a chance. Then I promise I'm coming to you.
I'm just wondering, that probably be more a question to Joachim, but I mean, as the Commission is working on the new Horizon Europe program, whether there would not be an opportunity here to link the fields of activities.
No, definitely.
Just wanted to add, when you ask about academia and trained experts and so on, inside the ETUC we have an organization called Eurocadres, and that is the cadre work. Cadre is French.
Team.
Very difficult to translate.
Management.
sorts of management, and we want to involve them, of course, much more, because they have usually a higher education, and that would be certainly a way to attract more and get more expertise on our side. One last remark I would, before you open, is Christoph said we need to write it in a new way. I'm leaving next week for Japan for the ISO 324 platform workers and platform economy, shared economy. And when I see the presentations there and the ideas, I think there will be a new way to describe it, and have an ISO on platform economy and shared economy. I'm really looking forward to that exercise. I mean, that will not be easy, but that underlines what you said. We need a new thinking for that, and to make it then even applicable for SMEs is a major task.
Quick one, if you would, for Ernie.
Very short. Please, if you focus on education, do not only focus on higher education, but certainly also take along vocational education and training, because there you have the entrepreneurs being raised to later on apply the standards and participate in the process of standardization.
Thank you very much. So we focused there on some of the issues relating to whether standards are fit for purpose, how to tackle this awareness issue, how to tackle this involvement issue. But I want to come back on some of the procedural challenges and particularly those questions that you highlighted, Joachim, at the beginning. But let's first take any questions or comments to our panel. Could I ask you please to introduce yourself and please be brief? Thank you, sir.
My name is Pascal Poupet from AFNOR, France. And exactly like you, I wanted to come back to the procedural challenge that Joachim mentioned at the start. That's not to diminish the importance of all the other challenges that were addressed by the panel, but I think we have something there that we've struggled during the work of the GIS, and we are not there yet. Those who participate in standardization trust the system, and they understand why flexibility is not a difficulty, but rather an asset. But those who don't have more, do not grasp how the level of trust, and especially we've seen that the legal community does not perceive this flexibility as something they can trust, and what they expect to give trust is conditions that we interpret as rigidity, and that's something for which we are not there yet. And I'd like really to put back the debate on that original topic that Joachim.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I saw another one. Yes, thank you, sir.
So hello, my name is Michael Schlögl. I'm General IP Council of Continental here in Romania, and I'm also responsible for standard essential patents. And for the automotive industry, the standards are becoming very important now, because, as you mentioned, we are going in the direction of connected cars, and even more, we are going in the direction of autonomous driving. And that will just be possible by standards and this technical background in the standards. Unfortunately, the backbone as Continental and Bosch of the automotive industry is now faced to a situation that the use of the standard essential patents for 4G and 3G, for example, is not possible because we are rejected to take a license. So we are actually not able to use the existing 4G technology to implement this in our products. And this at the moment is really slowing down the process. So we have valuable inventions in the company as well, in Germany as well as in Romania. So we have really good contributions, but we cannot use this, we cannot bring this to the product because we have no legal certainties with regard to the standard essential patents. One keyword here is Avanci, the other one is Nokia. What do you think about this? And this is especially a question also directed to the European Commission, because as you know, we launched a complaint.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. One over here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. My name is Jacki Davis. I'm with the SGS, and I'm talking here for the TIC Council, the Testing, Inspection, and Certification Industry in Europe, and not only in Europe, but worldwide. So we are interested in the harmonization of standards worldwide, as it is applicable to all products and services which are delivered to the world, not only in Europe. You mentioned something like the standards need to be understandable by the SMEs, that they can be used by the SMEs, and features could be implemented. And if I'm thinking about cybersecurity features, they have a problem. They always ask, what exactly can we implement to make our devices and services more trustable? And they are failing of finding the right standards. So this is one issue what we see. We see another one on the European Commission side. There is now the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework with the different assessment levels. We see possibilities of making use of certification schemes. We see several certification schemes popping up. The question is now how we can integrate those certification schemes in the existing Regulation 765 to make use of it very fast. And my question would be to you, Christoph, how is Sensenec preparing for the delivery of such standards that the SMEs can make use of it?
Thank you very much indeed. Sir.
Kalin Wild. We are working with ASRO in many European projects. During the years, we discovered that we have two problems. Education. Universities have a gap with a digital revolution in Romania. And we have a problem, and I'm happy that Secretary of State Bogdan Androni was here. We have difficulties with the politicians to understand the digital revolution. It's a fact, a very important thing, that we have to educate also the politicians for a digital revolution. It's not simple. We discover in the energy field that we have only 5% of the engineers who really understand what means smart grid and smart cities. Smart cities are moving very fast, that technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. A last burning one, if there is one? Or no, let's come back. And before I come to you, Joachim, a couple were directed at you, but maybe I can get, because you raised it at the beginning, this challenge of the harmonised standard. Christoph, there are a couple that, can you just pick up this tension that we were talking about between the legal community and their trust in the flexibility, and how are we going to sort this out? I want to get your opinion and then get Joachim to react. So we'll get some thoughts on that. And there was also a specific question to you about the Cybersecurity Act and the certification framework.
First of all, I mean, standards are there to build trust. That means the ones that are using the standards should trust that if I'm applying what is described in a standard, I'll be safe. On the other hand, the people that are developing standards trust that the governments and the legislator are going to refer and utilize that standard. And I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel again by doing kind of detailed regulation. And that's exactly tackling the point that you mentioned. I mean, if there is a lot of investments by the companies, by small companies, by large enterprises, in developing kind of the standards that are building kind of the precondition for applying new technology, and then the regulator is not using it or putting barriers that makes it impossible to put it into real use, then we have a problem. And that's why this public-private partnership needs to be kind of, I would say, re-established. Yesterday I heard, instead of a new approach, we need to have a renewed approach. I mean, to really go back to the essence of building trust between people, trust between the standardization community, the private standardization community, and the regulators. We must trust each other to really utilize the speed that we have in the private sector in standardization to complement kind of what is needed to cope with the new technology challenges. I think this is very important.
Okay. Joachim, and you talked really linking those two things, because you talked about the harmonised standards and you said we're getting there but we can do better. You also talked about improved relations being very important, so a clear link between the two things. And can you respond to the very specific point raised there? Thank you.
Okay, to start with the more general point, I think that what could be something like a final deal could be that I think that industry needs to accept the regulatory responsibilities of the Commission in the sense that